I finished rinsing the dishes and set them carefully on the drying rack. Aunt Lillian, sitting casually on the kitchen counter, absently ran her fingers through her auburn curls. A faint spark of mischief flashed in her eyes as she rolled them with exaggerated irritation. I tried not to react when she shifted slightly, crossing her legs and looking at me with a barely perceptible smirk. Her voice broke the silence. "So, Daniel, you and Emily have everything in common." I blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Well, not everything," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "We have boundaries. We don't discuss certain things." Lillian tilted her head, her emerald green eyes narrowing slightly. "Who else is in the loop?" "No one," I said firmly, my voice steady, but everything clenched in my chest. It was true, but it was clear from her skeptical shrug of her shoulders that she wasn't entirely convinced. "If you say so," she murmured, leaning forward slightly. Her gaze softened, but there was still a note of curiosity in his expression. "You're an enigma, Daniel. That's admirable." I sighed, wiping my hands with a towel and avoiding her piercing gaze. "It's easier not to know everything," I admitted. "Easier or safer?" she asked, a faint teasing note slipping into her voice. She reached out and ran her fingers along my chin, tilting my head toward her. The gesture was short, but it lingered in the space between us like a half-spoken word. I cleared my throat. "How's Brian doing?" I asked, deliberately shifting my attention. She giggled, pulled away, and playfully poked me in the shoulder. "Great way to change the subject. His name is Blake. And no, we're no longer together." "Oh," I said, not knowing what else to say. Lillian slid off the counter and took my hand, pulling me towards the living room with surprising gentleness. She always did that when she wanted something. We sat down on the couch, and the room filled with the quiet hum of voices from the next room, where Mom was chatting with Uncle Roy. Lillian sighed, opened a can of soda, and offered it to me. I accepted, and we sat in friendly silence for a while. The faint hum of the old ceiling fan added to the domestic tranquility, though the heaviness of the conversation still hung in the air. "I just want something different," she said finally, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "Not this pretense of normalcy. I'm tired of it." "What's wrong with normalcy?" I asked, sipping my drink. My attempt to speak casually looked clumsy even to my own ears. "Normalcy is overrated," she said with a slight snort, setting her can on the coffee table. Her fingers drummed lightly on my knee before she leaned closer, and her tone softened. "You've forbidden me to talk about this for a year, Daniel, but I'm tired of pretending. I don't want to hide anymore." My chest tightened and I turned away, my voice barely above a whisper. It would break Mom's heart. "Then she won't know," Lillian said simply. Her confidence both reassured and alarmed me at the same time. She took a deep breath, her shoulders straightening as if she'd made a decision about something more important than just this conversation. Her words carried an inevitability I wasn't prepared to face. I nodded, not believing I could speak any further. Before I could think of a way to end the conversation, she kissed my cheek, softly, tentatively, and painfully short. Her eyes stared at me, as if waiting for a reaction. I stepped back, catching my breath, and tried to reestablish boundaries in my mind. The next morning I went for a walk on the beach to clear my head. The sun was shining brightly in the sky, and there was a deceptive calm at the water's edge. Overhead, seagulls screeched, their cries merging with the rhythmic splashing of the waves. I found a spot near the shore, spread out my mat, and closed my eyes to let the sound of the waves drown out the jumble of emotions rumbling in my chest. The sand beneath the mat was cool and grounded me for a moment. The breeze carried the faint smell of salt, mingling with the warmth of the sun. For a moment I felt a slight peace, but it quickly dissipated when I opened my eyes and noticed 3 young men nearby. Their laughter rose above the surrounding noise, loud and unrestrained. One of them caught my gaze for a moment, and a friendly smile played across his lips. I nodded politely and returned to my solitude, not knowing how I wanted to feel. Time seemed to stretch as I lay there, my thoughts spinning in an endless cycle. The tide was coming in, washing the edges of my mat. I decided to walk further down the beach and came across a small cafe nestled amongst the dunes. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted in the air, inviting me inside. I ordered a drink and sat by the window, looking out at the vast expanse of water. It was both calming and secluding at the same time. Around me, conversations echoed softly, their ordinariness a stark contrast to what was going on inside me. Later, back at the house, Lillian's mood changed. She became playful again, teasing and laughing at dinner. Mom and Uncle Roy's voices filled the space with warmth, but I was distracted, going over the fragments of the day in my mind and trying to make sense of the quiet storm raging inside me. Lillian seemed to notice this. Her gaze lingered on me a moment longer than usual, but she said nothing. There was a sense of understanding in her silence, as if she, too, was trying to make sense of the uncharted waters of her own emotions. By the time the weekend was over, life had fallen back into its usual rhythm. But beneath the surface, unspoken emotions and unanswered questions lingered like the faint odor of salt water, unwilling to completely disappear. During the weekdays I was consumed with work, but in the quiet hours my thoughts returned to those weekends. The normal hum of everyday life seemed like a thin veneer over something deeper and more fragile. One evening, as I sat at my desk at work, the phone rang. It was a message from Lillian. "You've been quiet about something. Is everything okay?" I stared at the screen for a moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Yeah, just busy," I typed back, though the words seemed empty to me. Her reply followed almost instantly. "Same thing. Just wanted to see how things were going." I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The tension left over from that weekend was like a shadow I couldn't shake off. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but the thought both thrilled and terrified me. The weight of the untold hung in the air, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it demanded an answer. This story wasn't over, it was just beginning, weaving itself into the fabric of my thoughts and pulling me forward into an uncertain future.